Welcome to AF Academy. My name is Fame Razak and I'm the Global CTO at AnalogFolk. I've been working on the internet for over 20 years and I remember the first time getting online at university and being one of the first in my neighborhood to surf the World Wide Web on my 9.6K modem. Not many had the vision to predict how the internet back then might really affect us today. We use YouTube to learn, we share pictures of our dinners on Instagram, and we stay in touch with friends all over the world on Facebook. Business is carried out online and we use tools like Skype and Slack to stay connected to our colleagues, and it's all completely natural. It's an invention that has really changed the way we live our lives. But looking back, it's pretty easy to identify other paradigm-shifting inventions that have dramatically changed our lives. The printing press, for example, created in the 1400s, filled what I call is the knowledge gap in that time. Before then, knowledge was passed down from the gods, down to the kings and queens, and then onto us. But with the printing press, we could create and share our own ideas. The knowledge gap was closed. Moving into the 1800s, where we had a power gap. When the engine was created, it filled a gap at the time when we really needed to manufacture at scale. But all we had to rely on was manpower and slavery, which was not enough. The engine helped close that gap. Moving on to current time and my favorite invention, the internet. The world is a lot smaller now that the internet is here. I can catch up with my friends and my family in Pakistan instantly, and I can see what's happening live, real time, what's happening on the other side of the world whenever I want it. But today I'm going to talk to you about a gap that I think exists, that's probably existed ever since we've started to barter and create money systems, and a gap that's getting bigger and bigger in today's society thanks to the printing press and in part the internet. Because I say that because ever since the printing press, anyone can put out information, and modern technology where we can self-publish and create our own books and ebooks and put information out there. Who do you really believe when you see something on the internet? Who should you believe? Who shouldn't you believe? We can buy any number of goods and services from all over the world and they can be shipped to us instantly, then arriving on our doorsteps the next day. But how do I really know that when that product or I get my hands on that service and start using it, that it's actually going to be any good? I mean, we do our own process and we have a look online, we look at reviews, we have a look at the website, and we ask our friends. But we never really know until we start using that product and get our hands on it. Well, this new gap I'm talking and referring about is called the trust gap. And looking into my crystal ball right now and imagining how the future might be, I think the innovation that is going to solve that trust gap is called the blockchain. So today we rely entirely on middlemen. So that's middlemen like the banks, the governments, big social media companies, credit card companies, local government and councils, all to establish trust in our economy. And these intermediaries perform all the business and transaction logic of every kind of e-commerce. And authentication, identification of people's identity, through to the clearing and settling of record keeping. But perhaps the most simplest analogy I can use to describe this middleman process and the process of blockchains is buying a house. Now, you'd think that buying a house would be pretty simple, but it's actually quite a lengthy process. First, I have to trust an estate agent with the information that they are presenting me about the house to make sure that it's accurate and that the house is fairly priced. Then when I do find a house that I want to buy on the market, I have to go to my bank to make a mortgage application. And even though I already bank with that bank, I have to go through a fairly complex mortgage process just to verify the fact that the bank can, be comfortable and happy with the fact that I can pay those mortgage payments, which is kind of weird because I'm already a customer and they already have my information. So why do I have to go through this whole process again? Anyway, next I have to appoint a lawyer. Now a lawyer is going to require my ID, so they're going to need my passport, my bills, my bank statements, and a pile of other paperwork just to verify my own identity and to prove who I am. And this process continues. There are other things that have to happen. Local councils have to be engaged so we can determine if the property that I want to buy isn't going to be affected by any nearby development in the future. Lawyers have to go and figure out whether the property and all the things that have happened to that property in its lifetime have been done to the right standard. And we have to trust lawyers to verify that the fact that the person owning and selling the house is actually the legal owner of the house. So none of these centralized middlemen actually speak to each other, and their data is completely centralized. So this process, while it's all very good and it actually happens, it can take 2 months, maybe 3 months, or longer. So it does actually happen. It actually happens and it ends and completes. But there are growing problems with this process. To begin with, middlemen are centralized. So basically what that means is they act individually and they keep their own data in their own systems. And increasingly, they're being hacked. In 2017 alone, the likes of Uber, Apple, LinkedIn, Equifax were all hacked. So that's my images and your images in the iCloud, our financial data, our emails, and all our connections, the people that we work with, who we work with, the messages that we may have sent to them, they're all getting hacked and are getting leaked out onto the dark web. Middlemen, they exclude billions of people from the global economy. So that's currently 20 billion people are unbanked who can't get bank accounts. They slow things down. Why does it take seconds for an email to go from here to the other side of the world, yet it can take 3 days, a week, or maybe even never, for money to go from one bank account in this city to another bank account on the other side of the world? They capture our data. So every application and every system that we use produces data of some sort, and the middlemen own that data and they use it to monetize it. So while they're getting richer and richer, there is a social inequality that is actually growing. In 2008, the financial industry crashed, and perhaps it was the perfect time for an anonymous person or group called Satoshi Nakamoto to unleash a paper, a white paper, that outlined the protocol for digital cash that is with underlying technology called the Bitcoin. And this cryptocurrency really enabled people to establish trust and do transactions online without third parties. That simple act set off a spark that got the cryptography world in motion, and a lot of us excited in 2017. So Bitcoin is an asset. It goes up and it goes down, but more broadly, it's a cryptocurrency to be spent online. It's not a fiat currency controlled by our government or central banks. And while that's interesting in itself and perhaps a different topic, the real breakthrough here is the underlying technology, you guessed it, blockchain. Now you're probably wondering, how does this thing actually work? So back to my house analogy. Every upgrade I do to my house will no longer be collected in a pile of paperwork and a bunch of receipts stored in a box in a cupboard. It gets written when that transaction happens in a separate, centralized file called a ledger, but it's distributed across a global ledger using the highest level of cryptography. That global ledger is shared across millions of computers, forming a real-time network. And those computers can be desktop computers or our mobile phones. Our mobile phone technology is advanced so much that some of them are actually just as strong and good as desktop computers. When a transaction is carried out and conducted, it's posted globally across that network of computers. And the people running that network are called miners. So no, that's not young children or miners back from the 80s. They're actually people who have computing power to spare. That's 100 times bigger than Google worldwide. So these miners do a lot of important work. Every 10 minutes, a new block gets created and has all the transactions from the previous 10 minutes. Then the miners get to work trying to solve complex mathematical problems, and they compete with each other. So what they're actually doing is validating the information in that block, those previous transactions, to make sure that the data is correct and all the previous IDs are correct and nothing looks dodgy, nothing looks wrong. And they're actually rewarded in digital currency. And in this case, in the Bitcoin blockchain, they're rewarded with Bitcoin the currency. And then here's the key part that makes this really secure. That block is linked to the previous block and the previous block before that, and it creates a chain of blocks. And every one of them is time-stamped, kind of like a digital ID. If I wanted to go back into the blockchain for my house and erase, for example, evidence of a flood that's going to reduce the value of my house, I might want to go and try and hack the blockchain. But what I've got to do is hack and change the information in the latest block and the preceding block and all the preceding blocks in that blockchain and the entire history of that blockchain. And that's not just on one computer. I've got to do that on all the computers connected to the network at the same time. And when you remember that actually the blockchain uses the highest level of encryption going, that's pretty impossible to do. So this is infinitely more secure than some of the computer systems that we have today. So for the first time in human history, people everywhere can now trust each other and transact peer-to-peer directly. Trust is implicit, it's established, and it's not by some big institution, but by collaboration. It's done by cryptography and some clever code. And because that trust is native in the technology, many are calling this new revolution the trust protocol. So what is Bitcoin? Well, I've talked a little bit about it already. Bitcoin is the currency of the Bitcoin blockchain, and it's obviously created and defined by Satoshi Nakamoto back in 2008. There is only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoins in circulation. And I guess the scarcity only increases the value, and currently there are 16.9, almost 17 million coins in circulation. So not many to be gotten hold of, hence the reason the price is constantly going up. Bitcoin, it does have speed problems. So I just talked about how a new block is added to the blockchain every 10 minutes. Well, your transaction, let's say from the coffee shop, might take 10 minutes to process. Now, I don't think many retailers are going to wait 10 minutes for a transaction to happen. So it has a speed problem. And then there's also the factor that its price increases by 10, 20% or decreases by 10, 20% in hours. And that fluctuation is a scary thought for many retailers. Imagine standing in the queue for your coffee, waiting 10 minutes, and only to realize that your price of your coffee has jumped by 20% or decreased by 20%, and it may make you pretty happy. But anyway, that technology for blockchain and how other blockchains are out there that actually don't have as much time lag, I will talk about in future videos. Japan made Bitcoin legal tender in 2017, and that's led to vending machines appearing all over Japan where people can actually buy Bitcoin with their debit cards. These have since sprung up all over the world, specifically in London and New York, where you can use your debit card to walk up and buy Bitcoins. Didi Taihitu believes in Bitcoin so much that he sold everything he and his family own and moved to a campsite as he waits for Bitcoin to reach record highs again, securing financial freedom for him and his family. Bulgaria has seized enough Bitcoin from criminals who have been hacking and illegally mining Bitcoin. They've seized enough Bitcoin to pay off 1/5 of their national debt. And the national debt is 16 billion, so they could pay 1/5 of that off if they sold their Bitcoin. Fresh from suing Mark Zuckerberg, the Winklevoss twins bought $11 million worth of Bitcoin in 2013. And back in November 2017, they became the world's first Bitcoin billionaires. 50 Cent is my favorite story, accepted Bitcoin as payment for his Animal Ambition album in 2014. He grossed 700 Bitcoin from this, and at the time it was worth $463,000. 4 years later, and his Bitcoin fund is now allegedly worth around $8 million, but claimed recently that he doesn't actually own any Bitcoins. That could perhaps possibly be the best HODL ever. So HODL is a cryptography term used in this space for when you buy Bitcoin and you just leave it, sit on it, and you come back to it 5 years later just to see what it's doing. You don't look at it day in, day out, you just HODL. So John McAfee is a founder of McAfee Antivirus, is very vocal and very popular on social media and a huge fan of cryptos in general. But in late 2017, he predicted Bitcoin could be worth $1 million by the end of 2020, or he'll cut off his penis. He's also somewhat of a character, as you could probably have guessed, allegedly involved in pump and dump schemes. Now these are where he can use, and others can use, their social media following to influence the price movements of a coin. So you can talk up a coin, influencing its movement, and when it's reached a price point that you're happy with, you can sell and profit. But equally that works the same the other way. If you really are interested in a project and you can talk it down, and that hopefully might influence its price to drop, at which point you can get in at the new lower price, which is far more attractive. Allegedly, there's some dictators out there in the world who are also fans of cryptocurrencies. They're using their hacking teams and they're mining Bitcoins as well. But the price of Bitcoin really took a huge surge in 2017. Beginning of January, 1st of Jan, it started at just under $997. And it ended up almost at the end of year at $20,000. And what really accounted for this increase, price increase, and sudden rapid increase, was that general media started getting aware of Bitcoin and started reporting on it. So people and publications like The Sun started talking about what Bitcoin is and how its value was increasing every day. And people were just getting on the bandwagon and looking at Bitcoin and not really understanding what it was or what blockchain technology was or what the benefits going to be for the human world. They just looked at it as a way of profiting. So they were literally getting into this other term called FOMO. Now FOMO is the fear of missing out. So when you hear of something and you really want something, you have this fear of missing out. So you jump in without really understanding what you're doing. So that's FOMO. Since then, Bitcoin has really suffered a huge correction since December. It's currently valued at just under $8,500. So what can you spend Bitcoin on? Well, the earliest transaction back in 2010 was for 10,000 Bitcoin spent on 2 pizzas. Now, in current rates, that's almost worth $85 million on 2 pizzas. You can also spend it on Expedia to book flights and hotels. You can spend it, obviously, by peer-to-peer transactions. So I can send you Bitcoin and you can send me Bitcoin. And it doesn't matter where you are. The transaction fees are really low. But really, there's not really many other places that we can spend Bitcoin right now. The number of retailers and outlets out there are fairly limited. So people are treating it more like gold. It has a store of value and it's like gold, but digital gold. So the Bitcoin blockchain is just one blockchain out there, and there are many other blockchains being developed right now. And we'll talk about that in other videos. But I couldn't leave this video without talking about the Ethereum blockchain, which is the biggest competitor to the Bitcoin blockchain. And it was developed by a then 19-year-old called Vitalik Buterin. And it has major differences. And one of them is that you can create decentralized applications on an Ethereum blockchain. So what these effectively are, they're smart contracts. And within the smart contract is effectively code that self-executes. And the contract handles the enforcement, the management, the performance, and the payment. So it's kind of like a built-in bank account, in a sense, of agreements between people. Today, on the Ethereum blockchain, there are projects underway that go from everything from creating replacement stock markets right through to creating new models of democracy where politicians and governments are accountable to us, the citizens. So I believe blockchains can really help us with the problems of inequality, engaging more people in the economy and ensuring that we all get a fair compensation. And some of the most interesting projects that I know about are in the spaces of music, land titles, and projects disrupting the sharing economy, which have disrupted other economies, identification and instant fees, peer-to-peer payment systems. It's well known that musicians don't receive fair compensation, often left with the crumbs at the end of the whole food chain. Today, if your song gets 1 million streams, how can you earn £50? It doesn't sound fair. So Imogen Heap, the award-winning singer-songwriter, is now putting music on the blockchain ecosystem. She calls it mycelia, and the music has a smart contract surrounding it, protecting her intellectual property rights. So if you want to listen to a song, it's free, or maybe a few microcents that end up in her wallet. But if you want to put that song into a movie, well, that's different, and the IP rights are all integrated and specified. If you want to make a ringtone, well, that's different too. And she describes that the song becomes a business in its own right. It's out there on the platform, marketing itself, protecting the rights of the author. And because the song has a payment system in the sense of a bank account, all the money flows back into the artist, and they control the industry rather than the powerful intermediaries. This is not just applicable for singer-songwriters. It's any creator of content like artists, inventors, scientists, journalists, authors, me, you. There are all kinds of people who don't get fair compensation, and with blockchains, that will change. So much has been said about the sharing economy, but Uber and Airbnb aren't really sharing. In fact, actually they've got successful precisely because they don't share. They aggregate the services together and they sell them. But what if rather than Airbnb being a $25 billion corporation, it were a distributed application living on a blockchain, which was essentially owned by all the people who had a room to rent. And when someone wants to rent a room, they go onto the blockchain, they enter their criteria for what they're looking for, the location, the type of property, and it helps them find the room. And blockchain then helps them with the contract. So it can help with the verification of the ID. It can handle the payments. It's all built into the system. And it even handles the reputation management. So the reviews for the host and the reviews for the person staying in the property, once that room is rated and it's got a 5-star rating, that room rating is there, it lives and it stays forever. It's immutable and can't be hacked. All this can live with 0 fees, it can be instant. So I find it fascinating that the blockchain could be applied to every business model. So if you aren't thinking about how to apply blockchain in your business today, then somebody out there is going to overtake you with a blockchain version of yourself. Blockchain alone can't solve the trust problem or create prosperity, of course. People do by us using it and adopting the technology. It's here and it's been created and it's been delivered to us by an unknown person or a group at perhaps the right time in our history to potentially change our lives for the good, and if we want it to. So I hope you enjoyed this first video of the series. Join me next time where I'll be discussing some of the other blockchains and some of the other alternative coins out there on the cryptocurrency market. Bye.